A very good evening, dear friends. Welcome to the lecture session on fermentation process under broad daylight and in deep darkness. Fermentation, as we all know, is an age-old biochemical process. The significance of fermentation process needs no introduction. Fermentation is closely related to beverage and food industries. Almost all of the wineries use this age-old biochemical process called fermentation for the conversion of carbohydrate content in grapes to alcohol. As a result, the alcohol content in the broth is enriched. Wine is sweet to taste. Wine is a wonderful medicine. Historically, when we see wine has been an antidote to several illnesses. The process of fermentation dates back to the biblical times. Noah planted vineyard, produced grapes, produced wine from the grapes, and drank the wine. There is an ancient proverb that whatever we cook, we will eat. Whatever we sow, we will reap. That is why our elders advise us to do good, because those that do good will reap good. All around us, what do we see today? We see hunger for bread. Father Pope Francis warned the world that what we need today is not the weapons of war, but what we need today is bread. Bread to make people sustain. Bread for making people to live. We are seeing so much of hunger in Ukraine, so much of hunger in Gaza. God forbid the war can proliferate not only to the Middle East region, but also to the West and to the East. We are living in such turbulent times of war. So, as the ancient proverb says, wisdom is better than weapons of war. The rulers, the leaders are supposed to make wise choices by avoiding conflict to the extent possible and to live in peace with the neighbors. Teeth for teeth, eye for eye is the law of the older times. Everything has changed with the advent of Christ into the course of human history. If someone were to slap you on your right cheek, turn to him your left cheek as well. This is what Christ has preached. This is what Christ has practiced. The world leaders, when they follow the footsteps of Jesus Christ, war can be avoided. In the place of war, we see peace. In the place of hunger, we see contentment, fulfillment, fruitfulness, prosperity, joy. Once the rice bowl of Europe, Ukraine, that has been exporting cooking oil, sunflower oil, and many other food products to almost all of the world nations, has become almost paralyzed. The Bible says wisdom is better than the weapon of war. The world leaders have to use wisdom and avoid war at any cost. The one thing that grieves God, the creator of man, is bloodshed. It is because of the bloodshed caused by Manasseh, the Jewish people, the Israelites, were in exile to Babylon for 70 long years. History testifies that there is a punishment awaiting, there is a punishment awaiting for the blood that is being shed. As the Father Pope Francis advises, what the world needs today is bread and not weapons of war. All around the world, we see so much activity in producing weapons of war, exporting weapons of war, proliferating nuclear radioactive materials, proliferating nuclear materials that have enormous power to erase great cities from the map. This situation should be avoided. This can only be possible by choosing the way that Jesus Christ has followed, being the King of Jews. Jesus Christ experienced suffering, experienced humiliation, took wounds, took cross, offered himself as a ransom for saving the mankind. This should be the approach of the president of Russia or the prime minister of Israel, so that the world will be at peace. The situation that we are seeing in Ukraine and Gaza should not be extending to other Middle East regions. Coming back to the point of our discussion, fermentation. Fermentation is an age-old process, and this process is used for the making of wine. In the famous book by probably C.N. Banwell, dealing with molecular spectroscopy, Professor C.N. Banwell, in the preface, writes that NMR technique, NMR spectroscopic technique, has been extensively and widely used all over France, especially in the wineries, to test the quality of wine. Why? What does wine contain chemically? Alcohol, ethanol. Ethanol is the chemical component that induces pleasure, isn't it? It's a kind of, soothing feeling, a feeling of comfort, a feeling of relief. To test the quality of the wine that is produced all over the wineries in France, what do they use? NMR. This is how Professor C.N. Banwell made his product commercially appealing. When we say there is an invention, we should show its practical application. That's what Professor C.N. Banwell was writing in his preface itself. Why do we look at spectroscopy at all? What is its significance? Does it have any practical significance? Indeed, yes. For example, NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. Whether it is proton NMR, whether it is 13 NMR, multinuclear NMR, mass NMR, this NMR, that NMR, two-dimensional NMR, three-dimensional NMR, many improvements are coming up every day. Use of such advanced techniques, spectroscopy, for probing very age-old chemical and biochemical processes, for instance, fermentation, yields new findings. That's what Professor C.N. Banwell in his preface meant. Quite often, we neglect preface. Quite often, we neglect foreword. But preface is the heart of the author of the book. What is all the book about is summarized in few sentences, and the mind of the author is reflected in the preface of the book. C.N. Banwell's molecular spectroscopy is a very classical work on spectroscopy, and any teacher teaching spectroscopy must refer to the book by Professor C.N. Banwell. Coming to the point, we are dealing with fermentation process being carried out under broad daylight and in deep dark night. What is new in this? Obviously, fermentation will be carried out continuously in wineries all through the day and all through the night. But the full potential of sunlight as well as sun's heat is not utilized in the fermentation process. I can say with confidence that ours is the first group, or we are the pioneers in the field of bioethanol production using fermentation process being carried out under sunlight, under sun's heat, to produce ethanol concentration as high as 18.5 weight%. If we tell this result to any biochemical researchers, they can very well appreciate this because producing ethanol concentration above 4 to 5 weight percent is not so easy. That's why our wine has a typical concentration of 6 weight percent ethanol. Of course, in Korea, the alcohol content in the wine is as high as 15 weight percent because I have been in Korea. By the grace of God, I was blessed with a very knowledgeable and kind host in Korea. I have been in Korea for 1 year, and the special thing about Korea is during the spring, everywhere we see cherry blossoms all around us. The trees will be full of pink color flowers called cherry blossoms. The spring is the beautiful season among all other seasons in Korea. Of course, every season has its own beauty, but it's highly remarkable, the cherry blossoms of Korea during the spring. In Korea, the wine contains as high alcohol as 15 weight percent. Even though Israel, the biblical land of hills and valleys, is full of graveyards, vineyards, the alcohol content in Israel too is not above 6 to 8%. I have never seen 15 to 8% alcohol in Israel as well. In Israel, in Israel, I'm privileged. I was privileged to work with Professor Aharon Gedenken sir for my postdoctoral research. And the very first problem that was given to me is to carry out the fermentation of sugars. I must accept that I was very new to the field. I have never carried out a fermentation process, and Professor Arun Gedenkan sir has indeed introduced to me a very astounding and very challenging field. I'm a chemist by profession. Yeah, this is another limitation the researchers these days have. They underestimate themselves, narrowing down their domains, narrowing down their potential. Researchers tend to think that I'm a chemist, I'm a biologist, I'm a physicist, I'm a mathematician. But a century ago, it was not like that. While Madame Curie was working for her PhD, doctoral studies with Henry Becquerel, she was working in physics basically. And for the discovery of the phenomena called radioactivity, Madame Curie was awarded the Nobel Prize. Of course, the prize was shared by three. The three Nobel laureates were Henry Becquerel, that happened to be the PhD supervisor of Marie Curie, and Marie Curie's husband herself, Marie Curie, and the none other than Marie Curie. These three great physicists received Nobel Prize in the year 1903 for their discovery of radioactivity, which is a tale of serendipity. The virtue of the speaker is that he will touch all the branches, all the connecting dots, yet he comes back to the original starting point. What are we talking? We were talking about the narrowing down of the limitation, or rather the potential of the researchers, individual researchers. I'm a physicist, I'm a chemist, I'm a botanist, I'm a geologist. Such narrowing down of knowledge is not there a century ago. If Marie Curie were to think that she was a physicist, she would have never gone into the depths of the periodic table, and she could have never founded two new elements that enriched, that adorned, that decorated the periodic table. The new two elements that were discovered by Madam Maria Curie were radium and polonium. For her discovery, she was independently, no sharing this time, she was independently awarded the Nobel Prize. All the prize belongs solely to Marie Curie. In the year 1911. And this time the prize is from chemistry. So I should not say that I'm a chemist and I'm not a biochemist. The demarcations or the line of separation is being erased and the interface is being formed between chemistry and biology. Fermentation is one such interfacial area of research. When I was given the challenge to work on fermentation, Professor Arun Gadankan sir is an exceptional chemist. He thinks out of the box. He works in unconventional ways. Usually, if a biochemist were to do fermentation process, first of all, he would choose sterile environment, sterile medium. He will choose all yeast, fungal strain, cultured and a highly protected environment that it is not contaminated. And the fungal strain will be supplemented with nutrients. Under nutrient-rich conditions in proper culture medium, the yeast fungal strain will be allowed to metabolize carbohydrates such as glucose, sucrose, molasses, and others to yield ethanol. That is how conventionally the fermentation process is being studied. But Professor Aaron Gaddington sir is a brilliant scientist. He never beats around the bush. He advised me to just go to the supermarket and buy shmarim. Shmarim in Hebrew means yeast, used for making bread, baker's yeast. Quickly, I went to the stores, supermarket. Fortunately, it is open because in Israel, especially just before the start of Shabbat, if I go to the shop, I will be waved hands. Sagur, sagur, sagur means the shop is closed. Fortunately, I went before Shabbat, so Patwak, the shop is open. So sweet. That's how I started my work on fermentation. Those were early footsteps. And then we successfully developed a specially designed solar reactor wherein the fermentation process has been carried out and various feedstocks ranging from glucose, sucrose, marine, macroalgae, ulvarigida, cellulose have been flown through the solar reactor and ethanol formed in situ was separated as and when it is formed. by a special process called evaporation and condensation? Of course, Le Chatelier's principle is everywhere. The equilibrium will be pushed forward provided we go on removing the product from the reaction system. From the reactor fermentation chamber, the reactant is continuously fed in a continuous process, and the product that is formed, the bioethanol, is continuously separated by the process of evaporation, and the evaporated ethanol is getting condensed into a second chamber meant for collecting the product. What is happening here? More and more, more and more, more and more reactant feedstock is being converted to the product. At the same time, the formed product is removed and collected into a separate chamber. So the process is accelerated, driven more towards the forward direction. That is how the problem of product poisoning or substrate poisoning is avoided. Yeast can be poisoned by the substrate, yeast can be poisoned by the product. Yeah, product poisoning means, conventionally, biology says the ethanol cannot sustain more than 4% of concentration in the broth. But when we go on removing the ethanol that is formed, where is 4% ethanol that is left with yeast? The yeast is every time feeling only glucose presence. Yeast love glucose, isn't it? Children love chocolates. It's analogous to that. That is how we succeeded in producing 18.58% ethanol from the fermentation of glucose in a solar reactor under broad daylight. Of course, the reactor is operating on the night. Of course, in Israel, the conditions are extreme. As the people are extreme, the environmental conditions are also extreme. Of course, Israel was no different than a desert. The promise of God is that God will make a way in wilderness. He will make the deserts bloom. The existence of Israel is a true testimony that heaven is real. Because while I was a school-going kid, I used to read the Bible, read much about Israel. When I landed in Israel, I was astonished to see the things as they were in the Bible. The existence of Israel is a living testimony that heaven that is described in the Bible is real. We are all in our pilgrimage to the celestial city. Professor C.S. Lewis, the expert in linguistics from the Oxford University Magdalen College, was astonished when he was referring to the work of The Pilgrim's Progress by a layman, John Bunyan. Professor C.S. Lewis, being an expert in linguistics, doesn't expect a layman to write such wonderful book called Pilgrim's Progress. From such a layman, how such a literary masterpiece has come out. In his astonishment, Professor C.S. Lewis has referred to the work of John Bunyan, especially his work, namely The Pilgrim's Progress. Why I quote the remarks of Professor C.S. Lewis on Pilgrim's Progress is that we all are on our pilgrimage, irrespective of our faith. Death is inevitable, isn't it? Every human being that is born in this planet Earth has to die one day or other. Where are we going? After all, our stay on this planet Earth is only a sojourn. We are only passengers. We are only pilgrims. Our stay on this planet Earth is only for a short while. After that, where are we going? We are being taken to our ancestors. Where are our ancestors? Where are the people of the old? Where are they now? Are these questions not valid? Are these questions not philosophical? All these questions found answers in Jesus Christ, who said, "O death, where is your stench? O grave, where is your victory?" Means the death is not the last word. The grave is not the last word. Man is not created after all for death. Man is created for eternity. Coming back to the point, fermentation. Under broad daylight, as well as in deep darkness, the fermentation process has been carried out, and successfully we have produced 18.58% ethanol from glucose continuously. And the yeast was not supported by any nutrients as conventionally they are supported by many other nitrogen-rich nutrients. These works on fermentation process were funded by the Israeli Science Foundation that has granted a 4-year grant to the laboratory of Professor Aharon Gedenkenscher, and the grant application was fortunately written by myself, and that is why Professor Aharon Gedenkenscher, my postdoctoral supervisor, always writes in his reference letters that Dr. Neil, Dr. Indra Neil, whom I call Dr. Neil, is either the first best or the second best among over 70 postdoctoral researchers that I have seen all through my long career of 3 decades as a faculty at the Bar-Ilan University. That is why I kept him in my laboratory for 6 long years, funding his research. He could fund me because of the Israeli Science Foundation grant, which is indeed a large-scale grant that resulted in the publication of over 30 research papers in international journals of repute, resulted in the production of 4 PhD theses and publication of a book and many more. And Professor Gedenken's group's work on bioethanol can be referred for the acceleration of fermentation process under broad daylight as well as in deep darkness. Shalom.